Get started today. We have our top hat questions, just asking about uh, how last week's assignment went. So if you guys want to head over to top hat right now, I'll start that up. I'll leave it open for a bit longer just because people still might be trickling in. But yeah, the question's open if you guys want to go over there and start it. And yeah. Also, if you guys wouldn't mind maybe putting in the chat too, if there's any troubles you guys had with the assignment, or if there's any questions you had about it, now would be a time to ask. Um, yeah. Did anyone really struggle with the assignment? Like, did anyone not finish it? So if you didn't finish it, is that what you're saying? Mm, interesting. Top hat code. Here, I got it. I'll just put it in there. It's 239170. The video sessions will probably be uploaded later. Um, they take a little bit to go up. I noticed that. They will be up though. Don't worry about that. You needed more than one list. Hmm. If we have time at the end of today, guys, maybe we can go over a solution for any of the exercises that you guys struggled with, just to kind of show you. Yeah. For anyone who's just joined in as well, we're just on Top Hat right now. We just have our pre-session quiz or questionnaire that's going on right now. So if you want to head over there and just answer that, that would be great, please. Because I see only 24 of you have answered. There's 40 of us in the meeting. I'll leave it open for about 25-ish more seconds, guys. So we can move on. Okay. Just gonna check what you guys put in. So some of you guys said the Pythonic lab exercises were hard, were great, easy. Okay. A couple more people saying that they were harder this time. Good. It's good. That means we're testing you guys. That's what I like to see. Okay. So let's get started for today. So today's session is going to be focusing on getting inputs, and we're also going to build on the for loops. We're going to do the for in range loops, talk about those today. And then we're going to talk about while loops. And then there's also going to be quite a few examples today to get you guys some more practice. Yeah, so let's start with inputs. So we've already talked about mouse pressed, right? That's the one type of input that we've already talked about. There's also another that we can check if what's it called? If the keys are pressed. Okay. So key pressed works just like mouse pressed, as it checks if any key on your keyboard has been pressed. Okay. Um again, very simple. Like if no key is pressed, it's false. If a key is pressed, it's true. Okay, just like mouse pressed. Okay. But with key pressed, we can also check if a key or check which key is pressed. Okay. So by doing that, you use the variable called key, right? And you can check if key is equal to a value. So if you press like the A key on your keyboard, for example, you can say like the key variable at that point will be A, right? And you have to use the double quotes because it's a string, right? So you'll see here, right? This is an example where we can check if a key is pressed and if that key is G, right? And if that's the case, then we can run some code, right? Or not, right? So that's how key press works, right? There's just one more little caveat to it. You have to check which key it is if you want to check. You can check if any key is pressed, or you can check specifically which one is, right? It's just one more example, right? We can also in our draw function, we can also check if a key is pressed, and we can also print that key onto our into our window, right? So using the text function, right? I know we haven't really used that a lot in this, but again, this is just a quick reminder, right? Text, you just put in a string of what you want to be printed out, and then you have the X and Y coordinates. So yeah. So we're going to continue on with loops. So quick review from last week, right? We did for loops working with list. And if you have a loop of like if you have a list called shopping list, right? And you have your values inside that list. So in this case, it's eggs, ham, cheese, and onions, right? For each item in that list, right? We can print that item, right? Using a for loop. So for item in shopping list, right? We're going to print each item, right? And if you guys remember from last week, this code here will just print eggs, ham, cheese, and onions, right? So we're going to expand on that because there might be scenarios, and there's lots of scenarios where you might want to access multiple lists in one loop, right? And if you guys noticed with the loop that we learned last week, the for whatever in some type of list, right? You can only access one list, right? And there's many cases where you might need to access multiple lists, right? So how do we do that, right? Well, if you guys remember, right, that each list, right, has index values for each value it has, right? And we can access those values by using range. So range is a list of numbers from 0 to 1 less than that number that you give it, right? So if you say range 9, what it's really saying is it like range 9 returns this list that says 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, right? So basically starts at 0 and goes to one less than the number you specify. Okay. So range is really convenient if you want to repeat some code a specific number of times. So if you only want to repeat it 3 times, right? For example, in this code here, for I in range 3, right? We're going to print I, right? And we're going to print it 3 times. But you have to remember too that the values that I has when this code is run is 0, 1, and 2. So it starts from 0 and it does every number up into the number you specify in range, but not including that number, right? So we're going to see how to use this with list, right? So let's say we have a list of numbers, right? And the values inside that list are 5, 32, and 26, okay? And let's say we want to print all these values using a for loop, right? And we're not going to use the for number in numbers. We're going to use for I in range 3, right? If you notice here that numbers has 3 values, that's why we're using 3. Okay. You could, and it's like, this is something that's very common, right? If you don't know the size or the length of your list, you could replace this 3 with length, like LEN, curve bracket numbers, like find the actual, like you guys remember the length function that we used last week, right? To find the length of a list, right? That value works just as well as putting the actual number of values in here, right? So you can use that as well. But for now, we're just going to use 3 and we're going to print each value of numbers using this for I in range. So for the first iteration, I is equal to 0, right? Because remember, range will return a list of numbers from 0 to that number, but not including, right? So I equals 0. And then we're going to index numbers using I. And since I is 0, right, this is going to be find numbers of 0, which is the first value. You guys remember how indexing works, right? The first value is 0 of a list, right? So 5 gets printed out. We move on. We go back to the top of the for loop. I gets changed to 1, right? And then we're going to print 32, right? Because it's the second value. Second value has an index of 1, right? We go one more time, right? We see that I is equal to 2, okay? We print the third value, which has an index value of 2, prints 26, okay? The loop is done, okay? And then we move on to the code after, okay? So that's one way. That's another way to use list and loops, right? But we'll see later too how this works with multiple list, okay? So let's say we have two lists here. We have balls and we have sizes, okay? And we want to create a series of circles with these two lists, right? How do we do that, right? Well, let's use the for I in range loop, okay? So each of these lists have the same number of values, okay? So that's a key point to note here too, right? Is that they're the same in length, okay? And for every I in range range of 4, so numbers 0, 1, 2, and 3, okay, we're going to create an ellipse, right? So the first time around when I is equal to 0, right, we're going to use, actually real quick guys, for the first loop when I is equal to 0, what value in balls are we using and what value in sizes are we using? Can you guys tell me in chat? Right, 40 and 12, right? Because I always starts at 0, right? It's going to be the first value, right? What are the first values of ball and sizes? 40 and 12. Okay. So there you go. Okay. And then we're going to loop through and use the next value. So the second value, and then the third, and then the fourth. Okay. That's how you use a for I in range loop. Okay. You can also specify specific range with loop, a specific range of numbers with range, right? I'll show you guys how to do that later. Because you can specify, like, say you don't want to use numbers 0 to whatever, you can use like 3 to another number if you'd like, but we'll talk about that later. Okay. So let's get into our first question of the day. If you guys want to head over to Top Hat. And we just want to know what the following code will print. What will be the output, right? And really what we're looking for is what the output of result is, okay? So look, we have two lists, right? List 1 and list 2. Result is initially set to 0, okay? And then we have a for I in range loop, right? And we're adding a specific value from each list to result, okay? And then we're printing out that result once that loop is finished, okay? So if you guys want to go over to Top Hat, I'll start that question. Okay, the question is up. As always, I will leave this here for you guys so you guys can check. But yeah. You have to be, are you searching for the University of Calgary? If you're not spelling it right, it'll show up as not there. Or is that when you enter in the code, or are you looking for UFC? Or University of Calgary, I should say. When you're entering the code. Did you specify the University of Calgary before you entered in the code, like when you signed up or when you went to join a course? Also, we have 30 seconds left, guys, in the questionnaire. Okay. About 15 seconds left, guys. I don't know if everyone's answered yet, but looks like 34 of you have. I think that's about all we have. Okay. All right. So let's check your guys' responses. So 25 of you said, what's it called? Said the answer was 9. A few of you said the answer would be 3, 5, and 2. Or sorry, not 3, 5, and 2. Some of you said the answer would be 3, 6, and then 1, 3, 2, 0, 1, 2. So if we check the correct answer, we can see that A was the right answer. The answer is 9. Okay. And let's go over it quickly, just so you guys understand, right? We have our two lists here, right? List 1 and list 2. Result is initially set to 0. Okay. And you guys got to remember these are integers. So for the couple of you that said DU is the answer, right? You got to remember that the types we're dealing with, if we were dealing with strings, right, and we were maybe appending them to a list, maybe that would be the answer. Or if we were just appending these values to a list, like if result was a list and we were appending values to result, that would be the correct answer. Okay. But in this case, right, for result, right, we're adding whatever the current value of result is to the index value of list 1 and 2, and then setting result equal to that value. Okay. So for example, in the first iteration, when I is equal to 0, we're taking the 0th value or the first value in list 1 and adding it to result. And result will be that value after, right? So after this code is run, right, the first value of list 1 is 1. So we're going to add that to result. So 0 plus 1 is 1. And then we're adding 0, right, in this section, in this part here, right, which 1 plus 0 is still 1. Okay. The second iteration, when I is equal to 1, we're going to add 3 the first time. So 1 plus 3 is 4. And then we're going to add one more, right, from list 2. And we'll get 5. Okay. And then we have 2 and 2 from list 1 and list 2 for the last value. So if we add 4 to 5, we get 9. Okay. So by the time this loop is done running, okay, the result will be equal to 9. Okay. Does that make sense? Any questions about that, guys? No? Okay, good. Oop. So you guys remember earlier in the session, I mentioned that, you could use like for range in just an integer value like 3, right? Well, you can also use, and then I mentioned after it, sometimes it's better to use the length of the list to get the length function, right? To actually get the length of your list, because you may not always know the length of your list, right? Going into that loop, right? This is what I was talking about. So if we have our list called exposition or expose, right? And we see we have 4 values, right? But let's say we don't know that we're going to have 4 values in this. Say we're appending values to it somewhere in our code, but we need to loop through it at some point. Well, we can set a variable n to the length of this list, right? And then use that value in our for in range loop. Okay. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Okay. This is a much like more solid way to code. Like if you were to code further down the line, and like when you get into coding maybe in university or wherever, this is what I prefer to do in most cases, because then I know I will have the right length for my loops. Okay. And the thing is too, so if you don't specify, or if you use the wrong range, you'll either not use all the values in your list, or you might try and access a space that doesn't exist, right? So like, for example, if we set n to 5 here, right, we would get an error on the last loop and our code wouldn't work, right? We would get an index error or an error saying that we are trying to access a value that doesn't exist, okay? Using the length of a list is like a surefire way to make sure that you use every value within your list. So if I were you guys, I would get comfortable with doing this because it's a very solid way to ensure that you use every single value of that list, right? So let's go back to this example here. So let's say we have our what's it called? We have we're trying to replicate this this piece of code, this output on the right here, where we have multiple bars that follow your cursor, but they also have multiple colors, right? And we want to do this in one loop, right? Because it's much more efficient, right? It's also impossible to do it with two loops if you have to list, right? Because sorry, if you were to use a for say color in colors list, right? Because when you define a rectangle, you need every value to be filled, right? So if we look at our colors in our Y list, right? If we use a for I in range 4, right? Each of these have 4 values, so we know we can use 4. That's fine, right? We can fill with the index value of colors, right? So for each rectangle is going to get a different color, right? And then we can define a rectangle at the different Y coordinates for each value in Y list. Okay. So this brings us to exercise 1. Okay. So the goal is to make 3 circles move to the right with 2 lists and a for loop. Okay. You're going to need 2 lists, right? Like I said, and the 2 lists you're going to need are X and Y list. Okay. Those should hold the X and the Y coordinates for each ball that's on the screen, or each circle, sorry. Okay. The bonus part of this exercise is to use the WASD keys, or the WASD keys, to make the circles move left or right. Okay, so use A to move the balls left, use D to move the balls right. Okay, the eyes are not needed, but if you can figure out how to do it in the given time, like if you finish the exercise and you can figure out how to do it, that's even better. Okay, couple things to remind you guys, just to remind you guys, oh geez, just to say as well, right? Like, what kind of loop do you guys want to use to go through both the X and Y list? We talked about it a bunch already, right? And then how do you move the circles left and right? Like, what values do you need to change? And also, how do you check for that? Okay. Telling you guys right now, you guys, to move the balls left and right, you guys are going to need to need 2 if statements, maybe an if else statement, or an if and elif statement. You're going to need to make use of the logical operators that we talked about, not last week, but the week before. Okay. And you're going to need a nice big for loop. Okay. So I think with this exercise, we might give you guys 20 minutes. Let's start with 15 and see where that takes us. If you guys are still struggling, I'll give you guys an extra 5 minutes, but we'll get started on this now. So when the breakout room prompts show up, everyone join your breakout room and get started. Oops. What's going on?
Hey guys, just wanted to let everyone know that we're missing some mentors today, so you might see some differences in your group just for today.
Oh, so as we're still waiting for people to come in here, if you guys just want to just put in chat how you guys found that exercise. I know my group for the most part got it done. But how did the other groups fare, guys? How did you guys do? Or you guys just want to put it in chat? Did you guys finish it? Did anyone get the eyes working? That's good. As long as you guys got it working, right? Initially. Eyes or no eyes, that's fine. Okay, so let's go over a solution. Can you guys see this all right? I can't tell if I'm zoomed in enough. Can you guys see the code all right on the left? Yeah, perfect. Also, I don't know. It sounds like someone might have their mic on. If you can, you guys just double check and make sure that you have it off. Maybe zoom in a bit more. Okay, I'll zoom in a bit more. Let's do that. Okay, is that all right? Okay, let's start here. So, to start again, always from processing import start, and then we created our X and Y list here. Okay, these are going to be used for our X and Y positions. Okay, we have our setup function that just creates our window. Okay, and then inside of our draw, right, because we have moving objects again, right, we need to define our background inside our draw. So we do it at the top of each loop. It doesn't really matter where you do it, but at the top of your draw loop is usually the best. Okay, and then we defined two offsets. Now, if you didn't do the eyes, you won't have an eye offset, right? But you should have had something that changed the value of each X position for each circle. Okay, we just defined two because if you did the eyes, you needed two, right? And then we initiated our checks here. So we have one check that checks if a key is pressed, and if that key is A, sorry. And if that key is A, we want to move to the left. Okay. So remember, if we want to move to the left in our window, right, we need to add a negative value to our X coordinate, right? Because the X, again, remember the way X works for the windows is it increases as you go to the right. So if we want to go to the left, we have to decrease our Y value. Okay. So we set a value of -3 and -8 for the offsets. Okay. Again, the values are kind of arbitrary as long as they move left and right. Okay. If the key is pressed, but it's not A and the key is D, right? Notice too how we're using and here, guys. Both statements have to be true. Okay. If you used or here, you would only get this statement running. Okay. You'd only be moving left. Okay. You need to use and to make sure that both A, the key is pressed, and the key is equal to the specific key that you want. Okay. In fact, if you had or here and you pressed any key on your keyboard, it would just move left, right? Because that's the first check. We don't have an elif statement here. So, yeah. Okay. But in this case, we want to move right. So we have to add a value to our X coordinate. Okay. And then we have our for loop. So we use the for I in range length of X list. So since X list, oops, that should say list. Since the length of both of these lists is the same, right? We can use the length of one, right, to specify our range. It doesn't matter which one. Okay. So in this case, we use length of X list. You could have used length of Y list. It's the same thing. Okay. We just specify our colors for each circle, and then we define or we create each circle on our screen. Okay. After that, this is only for the eyes. So if you implemented the eyes, this is what you would have done. So this is just some logic to get the right position for each eye. Okay. So like, for example, the left eye is the X coordinate -13, right? These are values, guys, that you'd have to like play around with and just kind of see what works, right? Based on each circle. It would be kind of hard to kind of calculate it because right, like you don't have like a coordinate grid on your screen, obviously. So but that's for the eyes, right? And we're just using the X and Y values from the X and Y list. Okay. But here is what makes the circles move. So after we've created all these circles, and remember too that like draw loops, right? So some of the order might seem a little weird, but in reality it's a little arbitrary because this loop is going to be consistently looping, right? So you can change the values after you create the circles, because the next time this loop runs, it's going to have these different values in there. Okay. And it's going to give the illusion that the circles are moving. But this is where we change the values in the X list, right? So we're going to add the move offset to each X value in the X list, right? Because we're only moving side to side, right? And remember too that like if we want to move left, we're adding a negative value. So this value will actually get smaller if we're moving to the left. Okay. So we do that for every value in the X list, right? We also do it for the left eye and right eye X, right? But with the eye offset, right? Because they move slightly differently than the circles do. And then this is just printing out each rectangle for the left and right eye of each circle. Okay. Does anyone have any questions on this this exercise before we move on? I'll just show you guys quickly too how it looks. But if we have this here, if I press A, they move to the left. If I press D, they move to the right. So, oh, no, it stopped on me. Sometimes too, guys, you have to have your, oh, what is going on here? Oh, it seems to have frozen. But any questions before we move on, guys? What about W and S keys? Well, we're not moving up or down. You could, if you guys wanted to, you could add 2 more checks, right? To check if W or S are being pressed, and you could move those circles up and down if you wanted to, right? So you would just need to add 2 more if statements. So they would kind of look very similar to this, actually. I can show you guys, but we could do this, right? If we want to check if the key is W, we want to move, oops, that is caps. If it's W or if it's S, right? Now, if we're using W, we want to move up, right? But because the way the Y works, right? You increase going down. So we actually want to have a negative value. So we would actually need 2 more another 2 more offsets, right? I'm just going to do move for now. So we'll call this move X. So move X, move X. Also stay as Y, move X, right? And then for these, we'll call these move Y, right? Yeah, we'll leave that. That should be fine. Or no, we'll take these out because we don't want the eyes moving. I'll just show you guys what this looks like quickly. So if S, we want to, oh, I should maybe define this somewhere here too. Oh. Should have that tab in there. Right, so we want to move up by 3, move down by 3. That's fine, right? X and Y list, left, right, I. And then what we're going to do to here is we're going to do Y list of I plus equals move Y offset. Okay. And that should, so you guys can see now I can move it up, down, left, right. Okay. So I just added another check here too. You could, if you want, you could change these to else-if statements, right? It would slightly increase your code efficiency because it would just be checking if this one's true, and if it is true, it skips the rest, right? Because technically you'd only be pressing 1 key at once, right? You could change the rest of these to else-if statements, but if you used if statements, it's fine, right? Just make sure you're using the logical operators just to simplify it, right? So yeah, does that make sense? Any other questions? If you'd use caps for key A or something, what would happen? Oh, like if I change this to A, well, let's find out. Like cap A like that. Let's see what happens. So it doesn't work. So if I press shift A, oh, so you'd have to press shift. Okay, so keep it as a lowercase because remember too, like when you type into your keyboard, if you just press the A key and nothing else, it's going to be a lowercase a, right? So this is just reading the input. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, sounds good. If you weren't here in the last meeting, I don't know if the videos are up just yet. If they aren't, then you can always go through the slides. Oops. The slides are pretty descriptive as well, right? But yeah. Okay. So let's move on. So we have another type of loop, which is the while loop. Okay. Now the while loop, kind of like the for loop, will repeat a code a certain number of times, or it will repeat code. Okay. But the difference between the while and for loop is the while will check for something to be true. Okay. So it checks like a condition. So it'd be like, you could do like, for example, while mouse pressed. Okay. While that's true, right? Do something. Okay. This is a little analogy too, right? A while loop is kind of like eating food off a plate. Okay. You start eating food off your plate, and while there's food on your plate, you keep eating the food. Okay. Once there's no food, you put your dishes away. Okay. So the nice thing about while loops is it's not like you don't have to do it based on numbers, right? Like or index values or like ranges or anything like that. You can check if a specific statement is true, right? Check a certain condition. Okay. Um, how do we use them, right? So you can actually use while loops with integer values like we do for loops. Okay. Right. Where like in this code snippet here, we have our value I, right? And while I is not equal to 10, okay, we're going to print I and then we're going to increase I by 1. Okay. This loop will run as long as I is not equal to 10. Okay, the second I is equal to 10, this loop is going to stop and the code after is going to continue. Okay, a little diagram on the side here is kind of used to show you guys kind of like the kind of flow that happens with a while loop. So if you had the code before the while loop, you go in, you check the condition, and in this case, the condition is if I is not equal to 10. Okay. If it's true, okay, we're going to execute the code inside the while loop, which is print I and then increment I by 1. And then we're going to go back and check again. Okay. And we'll keep doing this until that condition is false, right? And then we're going to continue. Okay. One key thing to note too is that if you're using a while loop and you say don't have this incrementing value, can anyone guess what will happen if we left this out of our code in this loop? Like what would happen? Just press put it in the chat. Correct. It'll be stuck in the while loop. It'll be consistently printing I. I'm just going to show you guys quickly. Should take this out. Okay, if we have this, if we have I is equal to 0 while I does not equal to 10. Okay. Right. If we leave it like this, okay, we stop, we run. You guys can see that it's just printing. And if you guys look in the very corner here, it's getting smaller and smaller and smaller. You guys need to make sure you have something like this. Okay. Run it now, you guys can see prints 0 through 10 or 0 through 9. Prints 10 values, but it prints values 0 to 9. Okay. So this also brings us to our next question. Okay, so let's try another example of a while loop. So which line of code must we add to avoid creating an infinite loop? Okay, so if everyone would like to go to Top Hat, and I'll start that question here. Okay, so it's very same code that we just looked at. And the question is up. So guys, go ahead and feel free to answer that. About a minute left, guys. Okay, seems like everyone's answered. So I'm just going to close this. Okay, and let's check the responses. So again, most of you got it right, right? The answer would just be I equals I plus 1. Okay, because in this code, right, we're checking to see I is initially 0, right? And we're checking to see if I is equal to 10. Okay. Only way we can get there is if we add a value. And if you guys look at B and C, okay, we're decreasing the value of I, right? We're minusing 3 and then we're adding -5, which is the same as minusing 5. Okay. A is the only one that increases, right? And if we add 1 consistently to I, we will eventually hit 10. Okay. If we were to do something like I equals I plus 3, that would not work as well, right? We would get infinite values of I, because I would never actually be a value, would never actually equal to 10. Okay. Also, another programming tip: if you don't want I to reach a certain value and you want it to stop no matter what, a better way to code this would be to check if I, like, while I is less than or equal less than 10. Okay. You never know, there might be a situation where I actually gets incremented past 10, right? And there could be a problem. So in a lot of cases, it's better to just check, like, use as your condition to check while I is less than 10, because if you hit 10 or hit a value higher than 10, right, then it'll stop automatically, right? Whereas if you, like, you never know, the program might skip, there could be a small computing error, glitches always happen, right? So a more solid way to code would be to check if I is less than 10. Okay. So we've covered 2 loops, and some of you might be asking, like, what's the use for having these 2 different types of loops? Okay. And we kind of talked about it earlier, but the main, like, a really nice aspect of for loops is that they repeat a code as many times as you tell it to, right? Or repeat a code a specific number of times. Okay. You know how many times it's going to repeat. Okay. Whereas a while loop repeats until a certain condition is false. Okay. You don't necessarily know how many times that code is going to run, but you have a condition set in there that you know that code will reach to stop the loop. Okay. Sometimes while loops are really good if you, like, if you say have a list that you don't know how long it's going to be, right? And it's massively long, right? And you're just checking for one specific value, right? And once you hit that value, you want your loop to stop. Okay. That's a really other useful aspect of while loops. Okay. You could use a for loop for that as well, but you could use a while loop as well. Okay. So those are kind of the differences. If you guys have noticed too, the run function that we call at the end of our code for any of our exercises, that basically just puts the draw function in a while loop and it runs indefinitely. Okay. So that's one other aspect of a while loop. Okay. There's no cause in there. There's no condition in there that would stop the what's it called, that while loop, unless we put one in our draw function. So using while loops, right? This is another example, is like we can use a while loop to check to print out, like, say, a line of dots up into our cursor, right? So for every x value in our that we create, so we have an initial value of x equals 50, right? In this while loop, we're going to print out a circle for every x that we have, as long as every x up into where our cursor is on the screen. Okay. And but then we're incrementing that x by 20. That's how we get those little gaps, right? We're not doing it for every x, because if we did it for every x, we would just get a line of dots, right? Yeah. Okay. So building off that, we're going to use a while loop to print out a series of rectangles proportionate to where our mouse is on the screen. Okay. So we want to build this pyramid. Okay. So a couple of hints before you guys get started, right? Start with a variable y is equal to 10. Okay. And use it to make your loop. Okay. That's going to be That's also going to be your loop condition. Okay. Couple things to note. The X for all the bars is the same, because if you guys remember how rectangles are made, right, in Python, it's the top left corner is used for the X and Y coordinate. So you guys can see that the top left corner of every rectangle here is in the same spot, X-wise. Okay. And the height is always the same. Okay. The length is determined by the mouse coordinate. Okay. So you guys can notice once it gets to almost to the very bottom there, it's almost all the way down or almost all the way across to the screen. Okay. And then another thing to ask yourself is, how can you connect the length of the bar and the Y position in the loop's body? Okay. That's another thing. There's also a question in chat. So instead of using for length of list, we can now use while list. You can use either or. Most cases you'll probably use a for loop. Okay, while lists are usually used to check conditions. If you're using a list and like your code is dependent on a list, I would use a for loop personally. That's what I would recommend. Okay, so we'll set aside about 20 minutes for this. Or sorry, not 20, 15 minutes for this, and we'll head into our breakout rooms and get started on that. I don't think there's no skeleton code for this, so you guys are gonna have to write from scratch. Okay, again, don't worry about the colors. I just want to see the functionality work. Okay, so go ahead, join on your breakout rooms. We'll see you guys in 15 minutes. All right, just as you guys are trickling in, you guys just want to let me know how you found that exercise. This one I felt should have been a little bit easier than the one we did earlier, but I could also be wrong. How did you guys find this exercise before I dive into the solution here? Still people coming in, so a lot easier. Yeah, that's kind of what I figured. Significantly less code to write, which always makes it easier. But let's go over a solution because it seems like everyone's here for the most part. So from processing, import or setup, you guys know how to do that. Just reiterating it. Our draw and background is there. Okay. Fill, this just sets the color for each rectangle, as you guys know. And then this is basically the meat of it, lines 10 to 14. Okay. So we have an initial Y value that we set to 10. Okay. And what we're doing then is we're checking this Y value, and we're checking that it's less than what's it called? Less than yes, well, it's less than the what's it called? The Y coordinate of our mouse. Okay. Remember, we're checking less because we're starting from the top of in terms of Y is 0. And then as you go down, we have a 500 by 500 window. So the top is 0, the bottom is 500, right? So while Y is less than mouse Y, we're going to create a rectangle, right? And we use Y for two values. We use it for the actual Y coordinate, right? As you guys can see here, I just put this here as a reference, right? But we also use it as the width, okay? So if you think about it, the width of each rectangle is proportionate to its distance from the top left corner to of the window to the top of the of the rectangle, right? So if we run this, right, we can see that as I go down, right, it increases, right? And it increases by 50 each time. You guys can see, if you guys look at each rectangle in terms of how far it goes out compared to the rectangle before it, you can see it's a consistent length, right? So we're increasing it by 50, and we only create a new rectangle if the what's it called, if the Y value is less than the mouse Y. You guys can see too, if I just move my mouse down slowly here, right, my mouse is just below the Y value that's here, so a new rectangle gets created, right? And we can keep going all the way down here until we create one that's bigger than or just as wide as the window itself. Let me just shrink this. Yeah, just short of the window, right? So Very simple. Any questions on that? We got 10 minutes left, give or take. So no. Okay, good. Let's move on. Okay. So there's also a random numbers module in Python. Okay, and it allows you to just generate random numbers. Sometimes this is needed in your code. Sometimes if you're trying to generate trying to replicate like probability, like if you're trying and stuff like that, like random is a good way to do that. Okay. Couple things about random is you need to import random, right? And then random dot random with two curved brackets gives a random decimal between 0 and 1. Okay, so this is just also you can use random dot random int, right, which creates and then a and b, which gives a number between a and b inclusively. So for an example, if you did random int, right, 0 and 10, you'll get a random number between 0 and 10. Okay, I'm just going to show you guys what that looks like. If I go here, so if we go import random, okay, and I go x equals random dot random. I'm spelling random, right? Yeah. Okay. So if we do just random, okay, and we go print x, right? We can see we get a decimal. If I run this again, right, you can see it change. It's just a random decimal. Okay. If I do random dot rand int, right, and let's go 0 to 100. Okay. If I run this, 73, 68, 49, 2. All right. Just creates random numbers. It can be useful for things, especially like I said, generating probability, right? If you want to replicate that in some way, or if you want to create, say, random circles or random sizes, that's a good way to do it too. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge. Okay. So let's get into the exercises for this week. So for bug busters, I can't remember if I think you guys had one similar to exercise 1 in last week where you had to every time you clicked a circle would be created at the same y coordinate that your mouse was at, and they all move to the left. Okay. Um uh in this case you're doing something very similar except for they're all moving up, right? And but this time you have to take x and y into consideration, and you're using the mouse to add the circle. So every time your mouse is pressed, circle is created. Okay. For the second one, anywhere you click, you create a circle or a ring, right? Which is technically 2 circles. Okay. Or you could just do a circle that has an outline. Okay. That expands over time. Okay. For Pythonic lava, okay. Random might be useful in this, right? For exercise 3, right? You use a mouse button to add circles with random speeds. Okay. So you might need to create multiple lists here. Okay. You might need to create X and Y speeds, and you're definitely going to use random. You need to use random. Okay. And then for your last exercise, it's very similar to the Pythonic or the Bug Busters first exercise, except for you want to create these circles at any X or Y coordinate. And then once you create them, they bounce side to side. Okay. So, oh, and I also forgot. So we have some other exercises just for fun. Okay. On the one on the left here, if you press your mouse, it's going to create random circles of random colors. Okay. Again, randoms can need to be used. And for number 6, you're going to need to use keyboard input to create a spray of balls, if you will. Okay. And I think that's it. So before I answer questions, there's 2 end of session questions I want to ask you guys. If you guys just want to head over to Top Hat, and then I'll answer any questions after that. Okay. So if you guys head over, the first question is up right now. I want to give about a minute for each of these questions. So if you guys can answer them as quickly as possible, that would be great. If not, we'll make do. Okay, I'm going to close this questionnaire here. And then we have one more. Okay, seems like most you said the content was difficult. Okay, and then we're going to go to the next question here. Just asking you guys how the pacing was. I don't know about the schedule for posting videos. I don't Tony might be able to answer that question for you. I'm not too sure. Um, we try and get them up before the next session, but it's also the end of the semester for us, so a lot of us are quite busy with our finals and final projects and stuff like that, but we'll try and get them out as soon as possible.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't know the schedule either, but I do know that the recording, like on my end, is done processing a few minutes after the session is done. So I'll hand it over to another person, and I'll try to follow up on that.
Thanks, Tony. Okay, so it looks like we're pretty much done here with the questionnaire. I had one question already in the chat asking me how to move circles in one direction. Depending on which direction you want to move, you need to change the X or Y coordinate. If you want to move it up and down, you need to obviously change the Y coordinate. If you want to move it left or right, you need to change the X coordinate, right? Best case would be to use a variable, maybe called speed, right? That you add to the X value or Y value, depending on what you want to do each time. Okay, that would be the best way to do it. Okay, and pacing was just right. That's what most of you guys said. That's good to hear. All right, so we are in fact at the end of our session. If you guys have any questions, now would be the time to ask them. If you don't, enjoy the rest of your weekend. Let us know again if you guys have any questions in the chat. One thing to you guys I wanted to mention, right? Remember always that, like, as mentors, we don't want to give you guys the answer when you guys ask questions. Okay. We always want to kind of just lead you in the right direction, because you don't learn anything if we just tell you the answers. Okay. So sometimes when we give you information, try your best to think about what we're asking you and how it can help your situation. Okay. Any other questions though before we end? No worries. Sounds good.